Welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we are going to try something a little bit different. If you are familiar with most of my art dolls, you know they range between 2 to 3 feet long on average, which is quite large for a doll, and I want to see if I can go really tiny. Normally I make quite large pieces and I'm used to such a large canvas to work with, but I want to see if I can just shrink it down and make something as small as possible without losing a ton of detail. So I'm not going to call this a miniature because I've seen people do amazing miniatures that are highly detailed and look as realistic as can be. This is more of just, we're going to try and make the smallest art doll possible. So today we're going to be making a really tiny dragon. So let's get started. Okay guys, so the first thing that I needed to do was come up with a plan on how to make such a small dragon. So what I basically did was I drew out our dragon and I just laid out all the pattern pieces and everything. That way I had an idea of what we needed to do. Now everything right here is to scale, so this is the size of dragon that I'm aiming for. So it's going to be actually under 4 inches long, which is extremely tiny for me, and I'm not quite sure how much detail this is going to end up having. Now normally when I put my art dolls together, I do some of the sewing, we move on to the clay and the painting, and then we put everything together. Well, this is going to have to be done in kind of a different order. So the first thing that we're actually going to work on is putting the little wireframe together, and then we'll move on to adding the clay pieces to it. So I'm going to use the little drawn out pattern that we did to cut the wires and to bend them into the right shape. So like a normal wireframe, we have a spine, the wires for the legs, and then the wires for the wings since this dragon is going to have wings. The only thing different with this wireframe is how we're going to put it together. Normally I take a smaller gauge wire and I wrap all my wire pieces together. Well, this is my small gauge of wire, so what we're going to end up doing is we're going to use a little bit of clay and put everything together inside the clay and then bake this. So I'm just going to roll out a very small amount of clay and then we're going to push all of our wires into this. After we have our wires in place, I'm going to blend the clay all together so everything is locked in place, and then we're going to bake this at 275 for probably about 20 minutes. After I baked the clay, I realized I wanted to reinforce it just a tiny bit, so I did wrap it in a little bit of tin foil. Now that our wireframe is put together, we can start working on the clay head and then the feet. So I'm going to do the head first, and for this all I did was I took a little bit of clay and I put it at the end of the wire for the neck. Then I started using my fingers and my tools to kind of shape it into the rough idea of the head. So at this point I realized the sculpting for this is not going to be where the detail is. I'm going to do my best to get as much detail as I can and get the shape correct and everything, but I think I'm going to have to get most of my detail from the painting. I think it's mainly because I'm used to working in such a large size that this was very hard for my fingers, like I was cramping and everything. So other than shaping the head into a very simple idea of a head, I'm going to end up adding some eyes and some horns to this. Now the eyes are these really tiny little black beads, and I'm just going to be pushing them into the side of the face with my tool, and then I'm going to try and shape the clay around it to make a kind of a cheekbone or something to hold everything into place. I don't think I can get as small as doing eyelids. Now with the horns, I got extremely lucky because I knew that if I made them out of clay, they were going to be super fragile and I was probably going to break them when I did the painting, but I ended up finding some gems that were just the right shape. They were kind of pointed and long, and I ended up using those for the horns instead of making clay ones. I also threw a few gems and beads on the forehead to try and add a little bit more decoration to it. After placing all of the gems and stuff, I decided to go back and just add a little bit more detail to the sides of the face, and then to refine the shape of the mouth and nose. For the mouth, I decided to go with a simpler, more beak shape than to try and add a bunch of teeth and stuff. Okay, at this point, I think this is as detailed as I'm going to get, so I'm going to end up baking this for probably another 25 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit, and then we can move on to making the feet. Now for the feet, I didn't think I was going to get a whole lot of detail with the sculpting aspect because I actually love adding little scales and claws and stuff to my feet, but I knew this wasn't going to happen until I painted it, so I tried to keep everything very simple. So what I did was I made 4 even amounts of clay and I put them on the ends of each wire for each foot. Then I just used my tools to refine and try and separate the toes a little bit. Now the claws I thought were going to be really simple, just divide the end of the foot into 3 sections and then just refine the shape of it. But every time I tried to refine the shape of one claw, I ended up somehow bumping another one and kind of messing it up. So it took quite a bit of time before I got all of the claws the way I wanted them. But eventually I was happy with the feet and I quickly threw them in the oven so I wouldn't mess them up again, and I baked them for another 30-35 minutes just to make sure everything else got a good bake as well. And again, the temperature is 275 Fahrenheit. Okay, our clay pieces, even though they're really tiny and not perfect, they are done baking and we're going to start painting them. So like normal, the first thing that I do for my painting is I try to primer everything to match the body of the piece. So I'm going to be using a light blue to match the fabric that we're going to use for the body. After our first layer of paint has dried, I'm going to start adding more details to it. So I'm going to start adding some more vibrant blue to the face and feet and just kind of blend it into the color that we already have. I'm not trying to cover up the original color that we put down, I'm just trying to brighten up certain spots to kind of bring out the color a bit more. So I'm going to start doing that, and then I'm going to start adding some purples to add some extra details around the face. Okay, I'm actually starting to get excited because the face is looking really good. Of course, I need to clean up those eyes once the paint is dried, but now we're going to work on the feet. So I'm going to try and paint some little scales on the front of the feet, and then I'm also going to be painting the claws. After that, I'm going to let our paint dry for a little bit, and then I'm going to clean up the gems and stuff and get all the paint off of those. And then we can apply a thin layer of resin to go over these to help protect them. Even though this piece is small, I still want to protect all of the clay details. After that, I'm going to move on to making the wings of the dragon, and then we can start sewing the body together. So for the wings, I'm going to end up painting some details on them. So I have some fabric right here. I've got my wings drawn out on them, and I'm just going to start using my acrylics and some water and just trying to color them a little bit. Now while I'm painting, I'm actually painting 2 layers of fabric at the same time. So I've got them kind of stacked on each other and they're just wet, and the color will sink down to the second layer, no problem. After I light the paint job for the wings, I'm going to let it dry, and then I'm going to cut my wing pieces out and we can glue them onto the wireframe. So for putting our wings together, we're going to take a bottom and a top for the wing, and I'm going to apply a little bit of glue to one side. I'm then going to push that onto the wire for the wing that I want to work on, and then I'm going to take the other half of the wing and I'm going to put it on the top side of that. So we're basically sandwiching the wire for the wing in between 2 layers of fabric. I'm going to do this to both of the wings, and then we're going to have to set this aside to dry a little bit. Now with the sewing of the body, I will be honest, I had to do this a few different times because it was not working out. I wanted to originally put everything together like I normally do with my art dolls, but I discovered with such small bits of fabric, I had to kind of alter everything to end up working. A good example of this is the sewing for the legs. Normally I make an inside part and the outside part, which is on the side of the body. And I sew down the front of it, and then once we're putting everything together, I sew down the back of it. Well, sewing down the front of it this time with such a small amount of fabric was making it bunch up too much, and it was making the leg too short to work with. So I ended up just making the front and back of the leg one piece. So you can kind of see this on the new piece of fabric that we're going to use, that I have it kind of where we're going to fold it over. Another thing that I had to change was most of the time I do all the sewing first and then slide it over the wireframe and close everything up. Well, that wasn't working out either. So instead what I had to do was I had to do the sewing as I was adding it to the wireframe. So what I did was I started at the front of the dragon by adding the fabric to the neck, then I moved my way down to the front legs, glued the fabric around the ankles, started sewing the back of those and closing up the belly, then we got to the back legs, glued those in place, and then just kept going till the bottom of the dragon was all sewn up. The last of the sewing was just adding the strip of fabric down the back and then sewing all that in place and gluing it around the wings. Now after this, I decided that I wanted to add a little bit more detail to it, so I decided to paint the fabric for the body. So I'm just adding a little bit of purples, adding some scales, just whatever to kind of make it a little bit more detailed. Also, I went back and I refined the colors of the wings a little bit and then just kind of defined the fingers of the wings a bit more. Okay guys, and that's how I made a super tiny dragon art doll. I had so much fun with this project. It was definitely a challenge, but it was well worth it. Now I'm going to keep him because he's not my best work, and I normally don't sell miniatures, so I have no idea how to price it. So I'm just going to kind of keep it, and maybe we can add to the collection if you guys enjoyed this video and make different creatures. Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!